Okay, we're on Perek Bet, Mishnah Dalet, Eruvin Perek Bet, Mishnah Dalet. We're on the last Mishnah. We're continuing to talk about this discussion. We talked about Pasei Biraot. How do you use this well? They had this well in the public thoroughfare. What exactly was it used for? That's what our Mishnah is going to talk about. It says the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, Im haita derech harabim mifsaktan yisakena litzdadin. Let's say remember we said in the last Mishnah, I can make it really big. I can make it huge. I can expand this Pasei Biraot to be as large as I want, as long as I add pasim and the 13 amot between them. What happens if a road goes through it? If there's Reshut Rabim in there? The idea was to allow people, to allow people to water their animals. Specifically their animals, and I think I even have a picture of that, right? The animals to drink when they're going to Ole Regalim. They needed a place, so they would have these Pasei Biraot. So what if it's in the middle of Reshut Rabim? The public thoroughfare goes right through it. I made it big enough for a lot of animals to come in. Do I have to move it to the side? Because what I'm doing is I'm creating an imaginary private enclosure to allow for the animal to drink or to draw water for the animal. But it's not really private. So is there a problem if I bring Reshut Rabim through it or not? So, said Rabbi Yehuda, if the Reshut Rabim mifsaktan, it's going through the Pasei Biraot, it's dadin. I should move the Reshut Rabim, I should make people walk around, not through my Pasei Biraot. Chachamim said the whole thing is imaginary anyway, okay? And therefore, it's not necessary. So now, what are we talking about? Remember we looked at what kind of well is this? So in halacha, there's two types of well. There's a bor with standing water and a be'er. A be'er is mayim chayim. Okay, be'er is, the water can empty, the water can finish. And a be'er is mayim chayim, meaning it continually replenishes itself. It's got a water flow, it's got to flow from somewhere. So says the Mishnah, echad bor harabim. Whether it's a bor harabim, a public well that empties, ube'er harabim, or a public be'er, meaning that refills, ube'er hayachid, or a private be'er, osim lehem pasim. That you could do this thing with Pasei Biraot. Aval, but the bor hayachid, but if you want to do it for an individual, a personal bor, the private bor, then osim mechitza gavoa asarat tfachim, divrei Rabbi Kiva. Then Rabbi Kiva says you have to make a mechitza of 10 tfachim. Why? What's the problem? The problem is, the problem is like the following. Here's the problem. Shelo hetiru Pasei Biraot. The Chachamim said they only permitted this kula, this Pasei Biraot thing. It's a huge kula. It's not really a private enclosure. The Chachamim said it was an ilus. It was a necessary situation. You had to water your animals. People were in a specific situation. Okay, so they only permitted it. Lo hetiru el shumayim mitzuyim lebehemot ole regalim. It was specifically for people to water their animals as they went up to the Beit HaMikdash on their way to be Oleh L'Regel, to the Chagim. So therefore, the Chachamim made this heter. But v'chol zman she'en sham mayim, if there's no water, ein pasim torat mechitza. Once this is empty, the Pasei Biraot aren't going to work anymore. But the problem is, people are going to think, well, it's a private reshut. It's not a private reshut unless there's water there. So therefore, if it's a bor harabim, the water can empty. It won't refill itself. If it's a be'er, the water can't. So said Rabbi Akiva, I made you a chart. Rabbi Akiva said the only time you're allowed to use pasim if it's a bor harabim, if it's a be'er harabim, or a be'er yachid. Now we understand, let's think about the logic. The logic of a be'er, where there's mayim chayim, where there's water refilling, we can understand because there's always going to be water there. So the question is, how come in a bor harabim where the water can empty, why in that situation did Rabbi Yehuda say you still could do the pasim thing? What if it empties? So the Bartenura explains why a bor harabim. One second. Because he says, why bor harabim? I paske maya, if the water finishes, midkere ha'adadi. People are going to remind each other. They're going to say, oh, there's no water, don't take anything. And that's the reason why Rabbi Akiva says, even though in our case, it's interesting, the bor harabim is unusual, it's questionable, he says you can do the pasin anyway. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira and says, no, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira Omer. En osin pasin ela lebe'er harabim bilvad. The only time you can do a pasin is if it's be'er harabim. A be'er, the water refills itself, and it's the public. If it's personal, then I'm afraid, maybe he's afraid, if it's in each case, in all the other cases, if it's a bor harabim, it's going to empty, you got to do a mechitza, because maybe the water run out. Bor yachid for sure. But even a be'er yachid, you still have to only do it if you have a mechitza. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Even a be'er yachid, you still have to have a mechitza. probably I would assume a be'er yachid was afraid that the individual would be using it. It wouldn't make the difference between a be'er and a bor. And the only time it's permitted is if you have a be'er rabim. Then he says the pasim were permitted. The Bar Tanura says, and that's how we paskin. V'chein halacha. You're only allowed to. You're only allowed to do it in order to water your animals. This is a special kula to allow people to travel on the road on the way to Yerushalayim. But a person cannot drink water. Ella, if he wants to drink, yored labor v'shoteh. He's got to go into the well and drink in the well because he can't bring it out from reshut to reshut. You can only do it to water your animals. And if you can't go in, if it's too big, then I don't know. You have to ask a shayla. Or you have to make a mechitza, an enclosure around the well. So we learned finally that Pasei Biraot, I thought so. Pasei Biraot are only permitted for the case of olei regalim and only for their animals. And that was the kula. In order to encourage people to make aliyah l'regel, how am I going to water my animals? It was a nightmare. They had this whole system of watering stations that allowed people to water their animals even on Shabbat. We'll stop here. As always, if you have any comments or questions, email me at rspolter@gmail.com. I will dedicate a learning to the memory of my father, Rav Simcha ben Yitzchak Kalman. Have a great day.